Dodgers have some reported interest in Lucas Giolito. Does he make sense for their rotation? And we take a look at a couple hypothetical trades involving Alex Bregman and Pete Alonso, something we probably didn't think about before. That's what's on tap, so let's get locked on Dodgers.
You are Locked On Dodgers, your daily Los Angeles Dodgers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yo, Dodger fans. Welcome to Locked On Dodgers. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, the number one local sports daily podcast network. Locked On, your team every day. This is the daily podcast covering the Los Angeles Dodgers, bringing you the smart fans perspective on our boys in blue. You can find us wherever you find podcasts and on YouTube simply by searching for Locked On Dodgers. And if you want to become an everydayer, all you have to do is listen or watch every single day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. Visit FanDuel.com/locked-on to get started. If this is your first time listening watching, I'm Vince Samperio, joined by my co-host Jeff Snider, and we are both lifelong Dodger fans. We've both been covering the team via this podcast for a few years now. We've been covering the team via a podcast for a little bit longer than that. And, we've done it all. We've been in the press box, been in the locker room, talked to players, been to spring training, covered the team in at Dodger Stadium. We're not quite insiders, though. We're just some, fans here to help bring you some smart and rational thoughts or different ways of thinking about the Dodgers, or maybe the same way thinking about the Dodgers, depending how you feel. And, as it's been since the end of the season, not a lot of Dodger news, but there is always stuff to talk about when it comes to the Dodgers, especially with so many free agents still available. And a lot of them we haven't talked about. And one of those we haven't talked about, at least since the season ended, we did talk about him in the middle of the season, is Lucas Giolito. Robert Murray had the Dodgers linked to him. There's been a couple other either links or just general interest in Giolito. And he's an interesting one. He was somebody that we talked about maybe at the trade deadline. He did end up getting traded to technically Los Angeles team, just not the real Los Angeles team. Didn't do very well there. Ended up getting put on waivers, went to Cleveland. Cleveland. Didn't do very well there. And, not the greatest way to go into free agency. But despite all that, he's still expected by some of the reporters and some of the websites to get a multi-year deal, maybe even more than a 1-and-1 type deal with an option to rebuild his value. So yeah, Jeff, Lucas Giolito had some juice around the deadline, lost a lot of that juice, at least for some people. And now, maybe put him in the Dodgers mix and see what happens is probably what they're thinking.
Yeah, I think so. And he's only 2 years removed from being a pretty solid pitcher. He got Cy Young votes 3 years in a row from 2019 through 2021. And last year with the White Sox, he was only a little bit worse than he had been with those other teams. In those other years that he was a Cy Young, getting Cy Young votes. He wasn't much worse. And then he got traded to the Angels and he was a lot worse and went to the Indians or the Guardians and was even worse there. It's kind of remarkable. The big issue was home runs, honestly. If you look at the rest of his numbers, underlying numbers, he was, a similar, if you turn all the home runs into flyouts, so his hits per nine would go down too, in addition to his homers per nine. Like he was very similar to, maybe not at his peak when he was, but like 2021, when he finished 11th in the Cy Young voting, had a 3.53 ERA, 3.79 FIP. Like his numbers were pretty darn similar to that, other than the home runs. And so, I understand a lot of Dodger fans are gun shy when it comes to Lucas Giolito. And a lot of that, I think, has to do with Lance Lynn. The Dodgers just got a pitcher from the White Sox who gives up too many home runs, and that didn't turn out well. Giolito, I'm not sure what the issue was, and because he wasn't even actually giving up a lot of home runs when he was with the White Sox last year. That was just after he got traded. Suddenly it was, I mean, between the Angels and the Guardians combined, he allowed 21 home runs in 63 innings. Like, that's 3 home runs per 9 innings. That's remarkably bad. That's, I mean, that's even worse than Lance Lynn. But I mean, that was double his rate with the White Sox. And so I think if the Dodgers are really going after Lucas Giolito, it's got to be that they see something from his time with the White Sox that or maybe they see something with his time with the Angels and Guardians that they've identified. Okay, he was just doing this wrong, and we can fix that. And the one thing Giolito has going for him, he's durable. He has pitched. I mean, looking at his numbers, looks like he's missed maybe 1 or 2 starts in the past, what's this, 6 years? Basically since he became a regular starting pitcher for the White Sox, he's made just about every start. And there's a lot of value in that. Even Lance Lynn had value for the Dodgers last year.
Yeah, and when you think about Giolito, if the Dodgers were to get him, it all come in the context of where he came. Is he coming as the backup guy behind like a Yamamoto? Is he coming? If he's coming as the only starter they signed, obviously, yeah, there's something went wrong in the offseason, or the only starter they signed or trade for. But when it comes to him, I can't remember where I read it, but it was something about Giolito's a smart guy. He's one guy that sticks to the plan or has a plan and likes to stick to it. And maybe him leaving in the middle of the season, didn't help with that. He went to coaches that didn't know him per se. He went to catchers that didn't know him per se. I don't know what his process was with the White Sox, whether, it was catcher, him and Grandal or whoever was catching at the time, or the coach, the pitching coach, whatever it was, maybe that's enough to have thrown him off. And, it really just chalks down to that, because like I said, besides that, he's been a pretty good starting pitcher, not an ace, not a number 2 really, but definitely a good number 3 and definitely a really good number 4 or 5. His peripherals, in terms of velocity, hasn't really, it's gone down a little from the peak of in 2019, at least for the 4-seam fastball, but it's kind of sat similar and even went up from last year compared to 2022. Where he kind of missed out last year was he wasn't getting as much swing and miss as he had been before. And like you said, the home runs, I mean, you look at any one of his pitches last year and he gave up a slugging percentage over 430 on them, whether it was the 4-seam, the changeup, the slider. So obviously, someone wrong there. But I think it's one of those where him being a smart guy, wanting to get better, open to, I would imagine, whatever somebody would want to help him out with, along with the Dodgers, trying to figure something out, it would make sense. And I think for the Dodgers, it makes more sense in a 1-and-1 type deal, 2-year, whatever, with the opt-out after 1, or even maybe a 3 or 4 year deal with some opt-outs after that, lower salary. But if he pitches well and wants to leave and get more money, then he's down to do so. And I think that's kind of what the Dodgers probably be looking for, because they do have a lot of these young guys coming up. If they don't end up trading them and they do fit into the rotation, then, that's cheaper than what anything else would bring them. And if they do sign Ohtani, that's another pitcher that in theory would come back. So it makes sense for the Dodgers to get him. But again, it would be viewed differently if he was the only starter they got.
Yeah. He has to be a part of the pitching plan this offseason for it to make sense. But he does make a lot of sense as, when we put him in that box that they're thinking of him in, it makes a lot of sense. Our buddy Thomas at Champagne Guapi on Twitter, he said, Lucas Giolito is a younger Lance Lynn. I hope the Dodgers stay away. And, partly I think that's a little bit superficial. It's just the home run comparison, but also it overlooks the fact that a younger Lance Lynn was actually very, very good. If the Dodgers could have got younger Lance Lynn, they would have been very happy with that trade. So, I think Giolito, he still gets strikeouts. He still has good stuff. It's just, if they can figure out the home run issue, I don't hate the idea at all.
Yeah. So there is a couple other guys, not necessarily specifically ready to be traded, but there's inklings and rumblings and potential of being traded. One of them has a history with the Dodgers, not in a good way, and one of them doesn't really have a history with the Dodgers other than he's hit some home runs against them. So we'll talk about Alex Bregman and talk about Pete Alonso. That's what's coming up. So make sure to keep it locked on Dodgers. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Football season is here, and why not get in on the action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook? And right now, there is a promo out there where new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. What is a moneyline bet? Moneyline bet is basically picking which team is going to win. And if you put $5 on some team winning and they win, now you have $150 extra dollars to play around with and make other bets with. And if you've checked out the FanDuel app, you know there's more than just money line bets. There's spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. You put together same game parlay, choose different players for different stats or choose different stats for the teams, or you can put together parlays of a few money line bets of different teams winning each game. Whatever you want to do, you'd have $150 extra to play around with that. All you got to do is put $5 down and win a money line bet with FanDuel. There's no better time to get in on the action. So go to FanDuel.com/lockedon right now and kick off your NFL season of betting. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. I want to thank you for making Locked On Dodgers your first listen of the day every day. Make sure to find us wherever you get podcasts and on YouTube, and make sure to become an everydayer by listening or watching every day. We'd really appreciate it. And if you're on YouTube or you're just at home and don't know what to watch, Locked On now has the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. So go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. All right, Jeff. So Alex Bregman is obviously on the Houston Astros. He was one of the few players that remained on the team that were on the 2017 team that cheated the Dodgers out of a potential World Series championship. And he is coming up on the final year of his contract and hasn't had negotiations, or hasn't had good negotiations, at least with the Astros. And there have been some rumblings that he might be on the market, or at least the Astros aren't hanging up on people that call and ask about him. Now, the Dodgers don't specifically need a third baseman, but kind of these next two segments that we're talking about are a contingency plan if they don't get Shohei Ohtani, more so than anything else. But yeah, Jeff, it's going to be, I think it's easier. Last year was easier to sell Carlos Correa for me than Alex Bregman. But we can try to sell Alex Bregman here because he's still a good baseball player if you take out everything else that happened.
Yeah, and the pros of Alex Bregman, he's a legitimately great hitter. He's a very good defensive third baseman. He's well on his way to the Hall of Fame. If he can, he's played 8 seasons, and really, when you factor in the COVID shortened year and his half season, his first year, really it's 7 full seasons. He's got 35 career WAR. If he can play another 7 or 8 seasons at roughly that level, he's a Hall of Famer. And the other thing that maybe, I'm not going to apologize for Alex Bregman. I'm not even going to really try to take his side in anything, but I do think maybe by the time the Astros cheating scandal came out, he was the star of the team. He had just finished his runner-up in the MVP in 2019, back-to-back years of getting MVP votes, 2-time All-Star. Like, he was the face of the Astros by the time the cheating scandal came out. When it actually happened, he was in his first full season. Like, even though everybody talks about Jose Altuve and how he didn't like the cheating and blah, 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 but Altuve to me was the leader of that team and should have been the guy. I hold it a lot more against Altuve and Carlos Beltran, that those guys who should have had the veteran leadership to step up and say, no, guys, let's just play real baseball instead of cheating. Bregman, I don't hold it as much against him. And yeah, his apology was weak and stilted and scripted and ugly and stupid in, early 2020. But I'm sure at least part of that was because, he's thinking, well, what was I supposed to do when I was a first year player? So I could get past the cheating. I guess is what I'm saying. I could get past the cheating scandal if Bregman came to the Dodgers. Even before the cheating scandal came out, you and I talked about Bregman, and I remember saying he's the kind of guy who you hate if he's not on your team and you love if he is on your team. He's cocky, he's arrogant, he lies about his height, all sorts of stuff. But he's a really good baseball player. And so if the Dodgers missed out on Ohtani, it's easy enough, shift Max Muncy to DH, put Bregman in at third base. Honestly, it's not any harder for me to talk myself into Bregman than it was to talk myself into Correa last year.
Yeah. I don't have an issue with Bregman, just because I don't have a strong opinion other than the fact that he was on that team. But I think it's one of those where I don't know. It's just a weird situation in general. But yeah, I mean, on baseball wise, it makes sense. He's been an above average offensive player his entire career, basically. So, even if he was fully in that mode of cheating back in 2017, he's had an OPS better than that year two times since then, and an OPS plus better 3 times since then, and right under the other couple of times. So, he's continued to be good offensively. He's due $30 million next year, but, it's basically a 1-year, $30 million deal, which I don't think the Dodgers would swipe at. But I do think, now it kind of shifts to what would it cost. And, with the Astros specifically, I would imagine it's going to cost somebody that's either major league ready or close to major league ready. I don't think they're looking to close their window if they were to deal for him. Pitching wise, they did lose a couple guys to injuries last year. I believe at least one Tommy John, so they'll be down a pitcher. So they might be looking for pitching. They might be I know they're definitely looking probably for an outfielder as well. The Dodgers don't necessarily have any outfielders that fit that other than James Outman, which I don't think is someone that would be on the table in this specific scenario. But yeah, Jeff, what's like a package you think would look like for a guy like Bregman?
Yeah, and that's why for me, like the arguments against Bregman are all purely baseball arguments. That it's easy enough to get past the Astro stuff, but yeah, $30 million for a 1-year rental. He's likely to hit. Who's his agent? I didn't even look at that. All right, he's not a. Oh yeah, he is a Boris client, so he's definitely hitting free agency. So it really is a 1-year rental, which in some ways that helps because that does drive down the price a little bit. The Astros, from their standpoint, they let George Springer get to free agency and then they lost him. They let Carlos Correa get to free agency and they lost him. And so you could see them. That was kind of Rosenthal's point, was that maybe they don't want to get to that point with Bregman again. Let's at least get something for him. And if that's the case, maybe the Dodgers, maybe it's one of those things where either the prospect package is smaller because of the 1-year rental and the money due to him, or the Astros are willing to throw in some money to increase the prospect package. I don't think the Dodgers are going to give up any of their top prospects for a 1-year rental at a position that they don't actually have an active need. Maybe the active need doesn't matter. Maybe it's just the quality of player. But ultimately, it seems to me like, maybe a Gavin Stone type level pitcher, although I think I'm still higher on Gavin Stone than a lot of people are. I do think he's going to figure things out at the big league level. So a lot of it comes down to who the Astros might value, but maybe one of those pitchers headlining a deal and then some slightly lesser prospect along, a 3-for-1 kind of deal. But ultimately I think that might be the hang up there, that they just might not match up as far as what the Astros would want to get for him and how much value he has to the Dodgers.
Yeah. And that makes sense. And then, not that Andrew Friedman, would hold a grudge or, not want to trade with a team like the Astros, but it's one of those where you definitely don't want to help them, even though you're getting a great player. But if you give up a young guy, you're giving them a player with years on it. We've seen them develop pitchers pretty well over there, and even position players to a certain extent. A lot of the guys are holdovers with, Altuve being there for so long, Bregman, Correa just left a couple years ago. Jeremy Pena had not a great year last year, but, was good the year before. Cal Tucker's a start. So, they've had success with guys like, building up players, even Yordan Alvarez, unfortunately. So, yeah, I don't think there's a real match there in terms of what they need. Like, again, unless it is a starter that's close to major league ready or major league ready, the Dodgers do have some of those, but it's hard to see them. It would all come in the context again of the rest of the what they've done in the offseason, because they can't get rid of any of those guys like Sheehan or Stone or Pepio without getting or already having a established starting pitcher on the backside of it. So it makes sense baseball-wise in terms of Bregman the player if they don't get Ohtani, but everything else would be contingent on a lot of other things happening in the season. Like it all harps on a lot of other stuff.
Yeah. And also, I think we ought to acknowledge that there are some Dodger fans who are just no 2017 Astros ever on the Dodgers. And I respect that position. I don't necessarily agree with it. I get it. And, but yeah, so I think that's perfectly valid standpoint, even if I don't agree with it.
Yeah. And there's a slugger out there, similar stance, where he's getting near the end of his time. That team, although this team might not be competing, so maybe that's why they want to get rid of him. It's Pete Alonso. That's what's coming up. Pete Alonso talk. So make sure to keep it locked on Dodgers. Become an everydayer by listening or watching to Locked On Dodgers every day. Make it easy on yourself by subscribing on YouTube or wherever you get podcasts, and telling your friends and family and spreading the word. We're here all off season long. We've talked about a few free agents already, a few trade ideas already. We're going to talk about another one right now in the form of Pete Alonso. Pete Alonso is an interesting case because he is a star for the Mets and, one of the faces of the team, but the Mets are in a weird spot right now where they, don't know necessarily if they're going to compete next year or the year after or whatever the case is. Pete Alonso is going to start making some real money here through arbitration. And, it might just be that if they're not going to compete, why put their luxury tax higher than it needs to? And so Pete Alonso has been not linked to the Dodgers, but has been mentioned that, he could be traded for. So we're going to talk about him. He's obviously a very good power hitter. He's, rookie year 2019, 53 homers. He hit 16 in the shortened 2020 season. And then since then, he's gone 37, 40, 46, driven in a lot of runs. Has been an okay hitter at times in terms of batting average, has been a not great hitter a couple other times, specifically last year. But overall has been an offensive force since he came up in 2019. So, yeah, Jeff, let's talk Pete Alonso.
Yeah, and it makes sense that he hasn't been specifically linked to the Dodgers because Pete Alonso is a first baseman, and the Dodgers have one of the best first basemen in baseball under contract for, 4 more years. So really, Alonso only makes sense if the Dodgers whiff on Shohei Ohtani. And JD Martinez is no longer available or something. Alonso, if he came to the Dodgers, would be the DH, or at least mostly the DH. Maybe they would, as a way, we know Freddie wants to play every day. And maybe if they had Alonso at DH, maybe they would say, okay, Freddie, you can play every day, but 10% of those games are going to be at DH and have Alonso play first, So, but for the most part, Pete Alonso would be a DH if he came to the Dodgers. And I think that would be okay because Pete Alonso, the H in DH stands for hitter, and that's what Pete Alonso is. He's a guy that, sometimes they slap a glove on him and say, go play first base. And he's not terrible at first base. He's better defensively than he probably deserves to be for a guy of his stature. But he's a hitter. And the question comes down to, how much of last year was the start of a decline and how much was just a bad year? Because, he hit 46 home runs, but overall his numbers, he had his tied for his worst OPS plus, tied with his 2020 season, which was lackluster. He had by far the worst on base percentage of his career, by far the worst batting average of his career. He struck out way more than people are probably comfortable with. Overall, his strikeout rate was lower than it was his first 2 years in the league, but higher than it was in the previous 2 years when he was legitimately very, very good. And so, he's 20, he'll be 29 next week. And you start to wonder, guys built like Pete Alonso don't necessarily age super gracefully. I wasn't built exactly like him when I was his age, but close enough that I know how poorly I aged. And it's going to be interesting to see. I don't think Pete Alonso is going to be a superstar when he's 34. And the question is, will he be a superstar when he's 29? And that's a hard question to answer, because 2023 might have been the start of a decline. Obviously, he still has a ton of power. And so I think that's the thing that maybe gives you hope of, this guy, he's still there. It was just a down year, because I don't know that you can hit 46 home runs and not still be a decent hitter. It's weird that he basically couldn't hit singles. Like, he had, was this a 69 extra base hits last year, which means he only had 54 singles. And so that's, it was a weird season. And I think that is reason to give a team pause.
Yeah. And I'm always going to give some semblance or, some thought to the idea of when you're playing on a bad team, or a team that maybe more so, not necessarily a bad team, but a team that disappoints. It can be a little bit different. I don't know if it'll affect you offensively too much, but by the end of it, he didn't have much lineup protection either. He's in there, Lindor bats ahead of him. There wasn't much, behind him. He'd be in a, much different spot here in terms of wherever he bats, he'd have some type of lineup protection. He wouldn't be counted on to be that guy, whether that gets to him or not. So, the positives the Dodgers bring for him obviously makes sense. It's another Boris client who's going into his last year before he hits free agency. So, cost wise, it would come down to, what the Mets are looking for. He's probably due to make 20 some mil, I would imagine.
Maybe 20. He only made 14 and a half last year.
Okay. Yeah.
And so I would guess he'll be quite a bit less expensive than Alex Bregman anyway.
Yeah. So 20 mil, nothing the Dodgers would probably ask to take money on from the Mets. The Mets are probably trying to get rid of that 20 mil anyways, because it basically counts double for them essentially. So I think it if they don't get Ohtani, it makes sense. But you would, pay whatever the cost is. And I think this one would make a little bit more sense, because the Mets, if they're planning to compete more so 25, 26 rather than 24, you can give away one of those prospects that's a little bit, flyer type, not as close to the big leagues, or not Michael Busch specifically, because they have, Jeff McNeil and other guys that play in Lindor, and, they have guys around, and Vientos is a third base. Like, they have guys around the infield, but I guess, Bush could be their DH, but someone like that, to where maybe they don't have a spot with the Dodgers and they make more sense with the Mets.
Yeah. One of my favorite features on Baseball Reference is similarity scores. I don't know if you ever look at that very often, but similarity scores, it looks at statistical numbers and position numbers, and it tells you who are the players most similar to this guy. And if you look at the most similar batters through age 28 to Pete Alonso, number one is Matt Olson. That sounds good. Number two is Cecil Fielder. If you're familiar with Cecil Fielder's career, it didn't go great as he aged. Number three is Chris Davis, who is maybe the biggest cautionary tale of a guy not aging well. Number four is Tony Clark, who we know now as the somewhat ineffective president of the Players Union, but was a decent power hitter for a while. Richie Sexson, then Shohei Ohtani, then Glenn Davis, Fred McGriff, Ryan Howard, Mo Vaughn. There are, like, Fred McGriff. Did he get in the Hall of Fame finally?
Yeah, he's in there now.
Yeah, McGriff. Oh yeah, there's an asterisk there. McGriff finally get in the Hall of Fame. Obviously, Shohei Ohtani is very good. Who it remains to be seen with Matt Olson. Everybody else there, it's like, okay, that guy didn't age great, and so that's the concern that you have with. And even if you look at the overall similarity scores, there's not a single Hall of Famer on the list. There's a lot of guys like John Jaha and Miguel Sano and Carlos Quentin, who were good for a little while and then and then pretty not good for a while. So it is a 1-year rental. And so really the Dodgers will be looking at what's it going to cost and what do we think he's going to be in 2024. I do think I would expect, JD Martinez had a surprisingly good year, but overall it wasn't actually an amazing year. When you look at on-base percentage and strikeouts and all that, I expect Pete Alonso to be at least roughly what JD Martinez was last year, next year. And so you could definitely do worse at DH.
Yeah. And like I said, if it costs you a Dodgers mid, teens to 20s prospect, I think you make that deal. Especially because all this is coming off of you missed on Shohei Ohtani.
Yeah. All this. So these last two segments are all about backup plans for Shohei Ohtani, who we still believe that Ohtani is coming to the Dodgers. These are backup plans, and so we'll probably never even have to think about Bregman or Alonso because the Dodgers are going to sign Ohtani.
Yeah. Well, ideal world, that's what happens. So
yep.
All right. Yeah, there not much other news. We've talked about Dylan Cease before. The only other thing was that the Dodgers are mentioned as one of the more aggressive teams in pursuit of Dylan Cease. So we're a week away, less than a week away from the winter meetings. I would expect things to start picking up and maybe more rumors come around. But Jeff, you got anything else before we head out?
Nope.
All right, that's going to do it for today's episode. Thank you all for listening. Thank you for making Locked On Dodgers your first listen of the day every day. Become an everydayer by listening or watching every day. We're here for you every Monday through Friday. And if you want to subscribe, you can do so wherever you're podcasting on YouTube. Locked On has the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you through the local experts of Locked On and national shows covering every league, covering the top stories of the day. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. You can also check out Locked On Sports Los Angeles. Keep up with all the LA teams and what's going on with them if you are a fan of the other LA teams. So go check those out. Remember, you can always find us on social media, Twitter and Instagram at Locked On Dodgers. Jeff is on Twitter at Snydog. I'm at Vincent91. You can DM either of us for any questions, comments, or concerns or topics. You can also send those via email, lockedondodgers@gmail.com, or via voicemail text at 323-863-5625. We're here every weekday morning, and we hope you'll be here with us when you get in your car. If you're at home, tell your smart advice play podcast, Locked On Dodgers. And remember, you don't have to agree. You just have to listen. Have a good one.
We'll talk to you tomorrow.